Nikki Haley renews her vows to stay in the race.
I refuse to quit. South Carolina will vote on Saturday, but on Sunday, I'll still be running for president. I'm not going anywhere.
And the presidential hopeful isn't slowing down her David and Goliath battle, going full steam ahead into South Carolina.
He's gotten more unstable and unhinged. He spends more time in courtrooms than he does on the campaign trail.
We have a competitor, a bird brain, who is getting decimated. With your support, we're going to rocket the Republican nomination.
But her chances continue to look slim to none, trailing Trump by over 30%. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ. Scott, as always, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So to start, Scott, Nikki Haley's presidential ambitions are keeping her going. But in reality, what does she actually need to do to pick up enough delegates to secure the nomination?
Quite frankly, she needs a miracle. You saw that GOP South Carolina primary average. She's losing her home state, a state in which she has won before as governor by 30 points. The map doesn't look much better for her as we approach Super Tuesday, where there's more than 10 states on the ballot. She thinks she might have a chance in Texas or California to pick up some delegates because you can still win some delegates by not winning the entire state. But unless there is a once in a million polling error here, all the polls point to she's basically has no path to the nomination delegate wise.
So turning to another national story, Alabama is making big news after ruling frozen embryos are children. Nikki Haley quickly sided with that decision. Scott, how could this issue impact the 2024 election?
Well, what's interesting is we had some issues in 2023 around abortion and all the derivative issues around that. And this is one of those, or at least that's what the Democrats are going to make it out to be. And we saw that this issue, abortion and things around pro-life and things around these types of issues, increased Democratic turnout. We saw that in Ohio, where there was a measure that was going to support abortion, kind of go against Roe v. Wade. And we saw record turnout in Ohio. I think we're going to see that affect Democratic turnout throughout the rest of the year. We're certainly seeing it in fundraising. It was interesting what Nikki Haley said on that, because she was the one who stuck out a position in the Republican primary, a little bit more moderate on abortion issues. And in this one, she came out pretty firmly on the pro-life side. So we'll see how that plays. It's certainly in the GOP primary where she needs to win the voters. But, how Donald Trump deals with it and how the Republicans deal with it throughout the rest of the year will be interesting, because it is a motivating issue for the Democrats.
Yeah, we'll absolutely be watching that issue. And speaking of Trump, Decision Desk's presidential prediction map has Trump clearing the board right now. How do those numbers look, and what states have flipped, and how is the data backing this up?
Well, it's interesting. It's very early in the general election calendar. We're not even technically out of the primary season yet. But we look at states like Michigan, we look at states like Wisconsin, even Minnesota, which you got a light blue there. There are a lot of states with Donald Trump, at least in the early polling, he is actually doing better than he was in 2020. Now, we're still a long way away from Election Day, but early polling shows that he's got a lead on Donald Trump in some of these key states he's going to need to win to actually pull out a win against Joe Biden this time.
You're right. We're certainly a long way from Election Day, but we know that there's been lots of news surrounding the two frontrunners, Trump and Biden. And, Trump's legal losses are continuing to pile up, totaling to over $500 million, and that's after interest. And the president's brother, James Biden, just testified that the president had no direct or indirect financial interest in his business ventures. Do you think we're seeing any reaction to these cases regarding Trump and Biden in the polling?
Yes, but in two different ways. At least on the Trump stuff, it helps him in the Republican primary. Republican primary voters tend to look at these verdicts and these trials as it's the world against him, and so they kind of rallies his support. I wouldn't say the same about independent voters and Donald Trump and his court cases, but certainly among Republican voters right now, his court cases are at least mildly helpful in fundraising. Joe Biden, on the other hand, this is not good news for him simply because it doesn't allow him to talk about the economy, which is an issue he needs to improve on if he's going to win this November. And while, it's his brother and not him, this is not something that he wants to be talking about this week or weeks into the campaign.
You're right, it turns the direction away from those issues, and instead he's having to respond to questions about his brother. But you brought up fundraising, and we've seen a significant disparity in fundraising efforts between Trump and Biden, Republicans and Democrats. Can you talk a little about those numbers and what they mean for both campaigns going forward?
Well, it's interesting. We're in the first 2 months, almost 2 months into the year, and so we get some pretty good fundraising numbers and peek into what both the presidential campaigns are doing, what the supporting national committees are doing, and what some of the supporting House and Senate committees are doing. And it's pretty clear the Democrats have significant cash advantages across the board. If just looking at the presidential side, Donald Trump actually spent more money in the last 45 days than he raised. Now, he's still got tens of millions of dollars in the bank, but that's not where you want to be if you're trying to clinch a nomination and build a war chest. Joe Biden, on the other hand, had a pretty healthy January, raising over $30 million and adding to his war chest while his expenses are low. Again, many months to go on the fundraising side, but this is the time where you need to be stacking the money, not burning it as Donald Trump is doing.
Right. And moving to foreign policy, President Biden just hit Russia with new sanctions after Alexei Navalny died in prison last week. Trump continues to play softball on the issue. Are Americans divided on Russia, or do you think this could impact Trump's chances going into November?
Well, interestingly enough, the support for the war in Ukraine among the U.S. has waned a little bit. It's still slightly above 50% in terms of do people support what we're doing over there, but it's off of its high in the mid-60s when the war initially started. Alexei Navalny certainly got a lot of press, very sympathetic to the voters in America. And so I imagine when we start seeing some polling on it later this week, we're going to see an uptick in support for the war in Ukraine and obviously more awareness around Russia. Where it could be interesting is we see Donald Trump comparing himself to Alexei Navalny in terms of his persecution or his claimed persecution around court cases. So we'll see what mix up that has and how that affects the polls. But it certainly muddies the water a little bit.
So staying with the Russia issue, Trump's beating up on NATO once again. The former president has been on the attack recently, saying this.
When I came in, I didn't make a speech. I looked at the numbers. I said, these numbers are terrible. Nobody's paying their bills. And I told them that. And then I came back 6 months later. I said, now you've had time. But one of the heads of the country stood up and said, does that mean that if we don't pay the bills, that you're not going to protect us? I said, that's exactly what it means. Exactly. I'm not going to protect you.
But a new poll by Redfield and Wilton Strategies following Trump's threats showed that 64% of voters support NATO. Scott, do you think these attacks could ultimately divide GOP voters?
Yes, they could, because actually it's funny. Obviously, that poll is of all registered voters or all likely voters. But when you look at how that line and how that viewpoint plays among GOP voters, they love that, especially how he says it. The GOP thinks that, hey, if you're not paying for it, we shouldn't support you. I don't know that if there was ever a very serious threat to NATO that you would see those people actually support not helping out our NATO partners. But right now, that line is this cycle's version of let's build the wall and make Mexico pay for it. I don't know that the voters believe that it'll happen exactly that way, but they like that sentiment. So it helps them on the GOP side. But as you've shown, it's unclear whether it helps him on the independent or Democratic voters, which he's going to need at least those independents coming this fall.
Scott, it's only February, and we have so much more longer to go until November. Thank you, as always, for making sense of this crazy news cycle with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. One area where Americans aren't divided: if NATO countries are attacked by Russia, should the U.S. help defend them? 75% of Americans say yes. Here to make sense of Trump's threats and who should be paying what when it comes to NATO is The Hill staff writer Raphael Bernal.
President Trump has made a sport of mixing up NATO's budget and its military spending guidelines. The bottom line is NATO suggests its members spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. It's a guideline and not a mandate. For years, many of NATO's European members fell short of that goal, mostly because they didn't feel the threat of foreign military attacks. Needling NATO allies on the issue, though, is political gold for Trump, who gets to at once call for more military spending and to rile up his anti-globalist base. So NATO was formed in 1949 with 12 members, and then it slowly added Turkey and Greece in 1952, West Germany in 1955, Spain in 1982, and a whole reunified Germany in 1990. That's when things got dicey. To get the Soviets to agree to the unification of Germany, US officials told Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not expand further, but they never signed a formal deal to that effect. But then the Soviet Union collapsed and communist countries in Eastern Europe turned to democracy and to NATO. Russia's old allies were quick to turn away for good reason. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union created its own alliance, the Warsaw Pact, to counter NATO. When the Soviet Union had disagreements with its allies, well, it had a tendency to resolve some of those disagreements aggressively. In the 1990s, Eastern Europeans looked west to modernize, grow their economies, and escape their communist past. But some countries, like the three Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, they joined NATO out of fear. And that fear turned out to be well-founded when Russia invaded Ukraine, another ex-Soviet country that wanted to join NATO. So it might be Trump's threats or Russian President Vladimir Putin's aggression, but European military spending has gone way up. According to the alliance, 18 member nations are expected to hit that 2% figure in 2024.
That's it for What's America Thinking. Come back next week and be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And we want to hear from you. Leave your comments and let us know what's on your mind.